Good day to you. This October 8th, 2025. I suppose you're probably going to watch this a couple days later. It's been a while since I've done a movie video, and I wanted to do a review of a movie I watched a couple nights ago, and that is. Actually, a couple days ago, I watched three movies, and that is the Back to the Future trilogy. In terms of trilogies, I would say the Back to the Future movies probably rank really high up there. And it's kind of neat because it is one of those movies when they made it with the mindset that it was going to be a trilogy. I mean, the end of the first movie rolls right into the second movie, which rolls into the third movie. All three movies, all the first and second movie end with these cliffhangers. The third movie, I mean, it kind of does, but not really. The third movie more just kind of ends with, they could, but they really don't have to. But I think it was an interesting movie to review because now the first film, I think in terms of quality, if I were to rank the three movies, it'd probably go the first, the second, go first, third, second. Yes, you heard me right. After rewatching it this week, I actually do think the third movie is slightly better than the second one. And to be fair, some of it just comes with the reality that some of the elements of the second movie has aged poorly. But honestly, I'd pick the third one. The first one is leaps and bounds better than the first, than the other two. But the thing is I wanted to look into this movie, discuss it, and talk about it because it brings up quite a few interesting conversations. One is kind of a conversation about time travel. There's been a lot of movies through the years that dealt with time travel. In fact, about a week or so ago, I had watched the movie Terminator, which is about time travel, a much darker reality about time travel. And something I didn't realize until I was rewatching it was that Reese, the one who comes back to protect Sarah Connor, he came from 2027. So we're 2 years away from the world he came from. All right, so it's a very bleak future. But anyways, so we've had time travel movies, and so the question kind of comes to what are the rules of how time travel works? What's the impact of the actions, the events that happen when you travel through time? And I will say that Back to the Future is not really consistent. The rules that they had set in the first movie didn't really seem to apply in the second. Because you have this whole thing where he's slowly disappearing in the first movie. But that wouldn't really work because he would have been a product of a different timeline. But I'm not going to get too much into that. All right. But still, the questions is, so if they're going into this idea that the decisions that you made in the past impact the future, I think that'd be an interesting to explore because especially the things that happened in the third movie, I mean, there's some impact there. I mean, even the first movie. The impact would not just happen just to the couple of them. I'd be kind of interested to see if they ever went back in time. I'd like to see the journeys of Doc Brown. There's a lot of these kind of fun things that they could do with and I know there's an animated series. I can't really remember it very well, and I know the animated series kind of follows the train. But the thing I think that's the most interesting to watch in this movie is to observe the passing of eras or the passing of the decades. And you start that movie and the first Back to the Future, there's a lot of product placement. I noticed that. But the thing is, I know that I talked about this with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles film. that people got really upset and were really angry about some of the product placement in that movie. And I'm like, they had to do that to make it, because otherwise they couldn't afford to make the movie. And here's the thing, I don't get that angry with product placement like other people do. To me, it has to do with how they do the product placement. Is it organic to the storytelling? Or is it in your face, forced? I mean, you know, think about this. If somebody were to make a movie of my life, and they were to make a movie about my life, I guarantee it there'd be product placements. You'd see ads for Mountain Dew Zero Sugar. You might see an ad for Subway or Pizza Ranch or whatever. You'd see ads for Chevrolet because I drive a Chevy. There's all these little ads. If you're going to be accurate to life, there's got to be products in there. I don't know why people get upset about that. And they're definitely in there in Back to the Future, and they're organic. They're being used a normal way. There's a Burger King that's promptly, Burger King gets its little advertising in there, but it's in a very simple way. He's went past the Burger King. A lot of towns have Burger Kings. That works. But the thing is I liked with the Back to the Future in the 80s portion of it is that it was so authentically 80s. And I know that's so weird to say because obviously the movie was written in 1985. Of course, it's easy to be authentically 80s. But the thing is, it didn't pick like a highbrow 80s. I watched that movie. I watched this movie. And I see the hairstyling, the clothing, all of it. And I'm like, I was born in 1982, all right? So the first portion of my life was in the 80s. And so I'm looking at this movie, and every time I watch it, I watch that beginning scene with, especially the part where he's in the house with his parents, with his family, and they're watching, Jackie Gleason on the TV, and all the stuff in there. It reminds me of the world that I was born into. It takes me back to that. And I think that's really a credit to the movie that they didn't pick like a highbrow 80s. They picked a very down-to-earth 80s. There's a lot of 80s movies out there. Like, I watch, if I watch like the Ghostbusters, it came out a year earlier. Ghostbusters came out in the 80s, but it didn't have that quintessential 80s as much. There's certain things here and there, but man, is it there in Back to the Future. And I love it because it allows to create an aesthetic that compares it back to 1955 when he goes back in time. And of course, they do their best to capture it. It's really interesting to watch the progression. And it is a really interesting movie to watch and see how time passes. And it's also a very simple thing of, kind of remembering what it was like to be teenagers. To realize our parents were at one time teenagers. It's a very simple concept. It's an age-old... at the heart of the plot is this, basic question of... parents and kids often have troubles communicating. And, there's this one scene, it's like, parking with a girl. When I was a girl, I never did this. And then you find out, yeah, she was actually like that. She was exactly the thing she said that boys should not be. Or girls should not be. And again, I think it's a basic plot. On the back of the screen here, you could see it. There's this image of Doc Brown and Marty McFly, and one of the things that people talk about this a lot, the awkward, this is again another story I'd love to be in, I'd be interested to see with the Back to the Future, is what's the backstory of these two? People a lot of times because we're in a cynical society, we're in a cynical generation. And people are like, isn't it a little weird that you just hang out with this guy? And I'm like, it would be if it weren't for the fact that there isn't even the slightest hint of anything to be awkward about with them. I mean, you just hear that a guy and this old man and this high school boy are always hanging out. Yeah, that's awkward. But then you watch it unfold, and you're like, there's nothing even remotely awkward about it. I mean, he looks at him like a good teacher or a good mentor or a crazy uncle or whatever. Like, there isn't even the slightest hint of anything bad between them. I mean, he's genuinely emotional when he thinks that Doc had died. Um, it's, I mean, we have a very, and so that's why I'd love to see a backstory as to why they got connected to each other. How did they get connected to each other? And we don't actually. I mean, what do his parents know about him working with Doc Brown? I would assume so because the principal knows about it. But again, it's like, how did this begin? How did this relationship begin? Why did this relationship begin? We don't know. And I think it's a very intriguing thing, and especially because they're so different. With Doc Brown, you have somebody who's obviously a scientist, and you have Marty McFly, who doesn't really strike you as the academic type. And it's such an interesting thing. It's like, I'd be really interested. Like, there's a lot of side stories that somebody could develop off of Back to the Future if somebody wanted to. And again, maybe I need to go watch the cartoon someday and sit down and review that. The movie has a lot. I love I like the movie is filled with great characters. Obviously, you have Doc Brown, his father, which is, think McFly, think. Which, oh yeah, that's, by the way, that's not the words. That's actually the words of Biff, but George McFly, Biff. It's a movie of great characters, and I don't know if I have a good theological topic to have on this, and I usually do. I think really it is. I don't think it really has a lot to say theologically that I can think of. I'm sure somebody's like, "Oh, I thought of this. Why are we talking about this?" But honestly, I think it's just kind of more of it's a cultural conversation. The passing of time, the impact of history. How does one little decision? I mean, that's kind of the thing. Is like when. I mean, the movie does really focus on, there's this personality flaws, these decisions that people make that impact their entire lives. I mean, George McFly, in the original version of his life, he meets Lorraine because he was being a peeping Tom. He was spying on her. Gets hit by her dad's car. And it's, the Florence Nightingale effect. But when he falls in love with her because he defended her. Then the entire nature of their marriage is different. And twice you see him stand up and protect her, defend her. And all of a sudden he's confident. And it ends up leading to a better life for his son and daughter. I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing. Is like, how much can a single monumental moment in life impact the person you become? And then with Marty McFly, they have that same kind of thing. Marty has this flaw that he doesn't like people calling him chicken or yellow or whatever, or afraid or whatever. And again, they kind of play into that ends up ruining his life. And he gets into this horrible car accident. We find out in Back to the Future 2 that he gets in a car accident. Like I said, it's really interesting is how a single decision, a singular moment can impact Does that really impact who we are as much as we think it does? And I don't think it's like the little itty bitty moments, it's the big moments. It's that big moment of decision. How much does it impact us? And you can't help but think about your own life. It's like, what happened in my past? What happened in my life that impacts how I act now, how I live now? And both the positive and the negative. Like I said, it's a movie that there's good discussions or philosophical discussions. I don't know if there's anything really ethical. I think it's just more of decisions, and it is kind of interesting to talk about the generational changes. One of the things I observed in Back to the Future 3 was they really didn't show much of Hill Valley when he comes back in time, when he comes back to 1985. And the reason I kind of theorize is that Back to the Future 3 was filmed in 1989, came out in 1989. It was 4 years later. I think the world had already changed too much. You've moved from the Reagan years into the Bush years. And, the world's starting to change. One of the things I couldn't help to... This is something I've observed in a number of movies. And I actually think it would be really interesting to do a Back to the Future type movie now. Not to a back in time... Why I like Back to the Future compared to like a Terminator or whatever is because they tend to be very bleak in their future. I like this because it, explores the questions. It gets us to think about where we were. So it's 2025 right now. If we were to go back 30 years to 1990, what would that look like for a high schooler now to go back to 1995? And experience 1995. I would have been 13 years old in 95. But I mean, kind of imagining what would that be like, that experience. Internet's like in its... some people have internet, but very few. I think 98, was when we got our first home computer and we started using America Online. I don't think we had them I don't think we were using it in 95. Your video games were basically Nintendo's, Super Nintendo, so video gaming was a thing, but they weren't. It was definitely not like it is now. To not have your phone everywhere you go. It would be a really interesting thing to see someone do this. They don't have to call it Back to the Future, but that plot. To examine what would it look like for a high schooler in 2025 to go back to 1995 and experience high school life in that world, what it looked like for their parents. I think that'd be an interesting plot. That'd be an interesting story to experience. I think there's also this interesting thing is to think about what's 2015, because in the movie, so in Back to the Future 2, he goes to the future, he goes to 2015, and the world is very different. The world of 2015 is drastically different than what 2015 actually ended up being. There's kind of a plot there. Like, I don't know what you do with that, but it's like, obviously we didn't have flying cars. Or hoverboards, or any of a number of things. The Cubs didn't win the World Series 1 year later, and it wasn't over. I don't know if the Miami Marlins were involved with that or not. I can't remember. But they could have been in the World Series, but I don't think they're in the playoffs that year. I'd have to go look it up. But that happened a year later, so they're off by a year, which is kind of impressive. But it would be interesting. Even to do something with that, it's like, what the future actually ended up being. What if they redid a 1985? What if they actually redid 1985 Back to the Future, not so much as a remake, but what if they actually did a person from 1985 went to what 2015 actually ended up being like? Would that look different? Like you did Back to the Future, 1985, they went to 2015, but not the 2015 that was portrayed in the movie, but the 2015 that we actually experienced. Obama's on his second to last year of presidency. The Cubs have not yet won a World Series. They win a year later. But what would it look like then? And I mean, what would somebody in 1985 think of 2015? I mean, there's some interesting the passages of the years to think about where we've gone with, and so much of its technology and how technology impacts culture, the nature of politics, things like that. What would it look like? And so, I mean, the whole concept of the Back to the Future, I think it's a really interesting thing because what makes it so interesting is because it's this down to earth, ground level time travel. Everyday person, your everyday Marty, so to speak, traveling back 30 years, forward 30 years, and what it looks like. And I mean, here would be the question: if we were to go forward, so again, going with this Back to the Future concept, so let's just play with this. If I were to create a new Back to the Future trilogy, maybe you wouldn't use this name. This is what I would do. I'd do a 3-part movie. The first movie would be taking place in 1985. Do your very best to capture as much of the aesthetic as you can, like the original movie had. But go forward to the real 2015 and do a story with that. If I were to do a second one, it would be somebody in 2025 to go back to 1995. And then the third movie would be go to 19. I think there'd be man, you could almost do a fourth movie. You know, do a third movie be to go to 2055. Man, that'd be a crazy thought. What will the world look like in 2055? That would be an intriguing question. And if you were to do a Wild West equivalent, I don't know if I'd. Man, would we struggle in the West? Man, would we struggle with that? I mean, we are so accustomed to having, technology everywhere we go. If you went back to 2020 to the Wild West, man, would we struggle. But I wonder what would be another era to go back to. I think there's one little line in the third movie where he said, I could have gone back to the Dark Ages. Man, that'd be interesting. Maybe go back to the days of the Revolution. Of course, you got to make sure you're in a part of the world that's actually settled. Because I mean, like, they were in Back to the Future largely takes place in California. And so if you were to go back, to the colonial days, it'd be a very interesting world. Because obviously it'd be very intriguing. I mean, what would it be like to go back to, go to 1776 in Iowa? What would that look like? Because you're not at the Declaration. You're at the Declaration, but Iowa isn't part of the colonies. It'd be an interesting exploration. I take a lot of historical background, historical research to figure that out. But I mean, I think this is the concept of Back to the Future. I think it'd be something really, really interesting somebody to dig into. Because it's a really good way, it would be a way to really think through how much the world has changed. How much we take for granted. And it's a good way to actually get us almost empathetic. Literally, because empathy, the idea of empathy is to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, right? To really get into the empathy of the past. Like, imagine person actually going back to the past and really experiencing that past. So, that's kind of my ramblings, my thoughts as I watched, after having watched the Back to the Future films. This is, by the way, a reason I watched it. We're in the fall. I kind of see Back to the Future kind of as a fall movie. It takes place in October and November, I think. So it kind of fits into that category. So, but anyways, I hope this was interesting, thoughtful, whatever. I know I didn't really get too theologically deep with this one. But I don't know what I'm going to do next for a movie. I might do something Halloween-esque in the near future. But blessings. Have a good day. Amen.